Dinner, they thanked everyone except me. I didn't react. Not when it happened. Not when they moved on like it was nothing. But something about it didn't feel small. And by the time I understood why, it was already too late to ignore it. The table looked the way it always did. Full, warm, carefully put together in a way that felt effortless to anyone who hadn't been in the kitchen for the past 4 hours. The plates were set before anyone arrived. The food had been prepared in stages, timed so that everything would be ready at once, not too early, not too late. Even the smallest things, the sauces, the drinks, the little adjustments that made the whole evening feel smooth, had already been taken care of long before anyone sat down. By the time they walked in, there was nothing left to do, and that was always the point. Emily stepped in first, her presence filling the room in a way that felt natural, effortless. "It smells amazing in here," she said, smiling as she slipped off her coat. My son followed, glancing toward the table with a quick nod, the kind people give when everything is exactly how they expect it to be. Their daughter ran ahead, her attention already somewhere else, stopping only when something caught her interest. Everything unfolded naturally. It always did. Coats were set aside. Voices overlapped. Conversations began without effort. I moved quietly between the kitchen and the table, adjusting small things before anyone noticed they needed adjusting, keeping everything on track without interrupting the rhythm once it began. Dinner started without announcement. They simply sat down. I took the seat at the end of the table, not because anyone told me to, but because that was where space remained. The conversation moved easily. Plans, updates, small stories. Nothing important, nothing difficult. The kind of conversation that fills space without asking anything from anyone. At one point, Emily set her fork down and looked around the table. "I just want to say thank you," she said. Her tone was warm, genuine, and for a moment, the room settled around it. "To everyone," she continued, "for making tonight happen." She turned slightly toward my son. "Thank you for picking up the groceries. That saved me so much time." He smiled. "No problem." Then she looked at their daughter. "And thank you for helping me set the table earlier." The girl grinned. "I did the napkins." "Yes, you did," Emily said, laughing softly. Then she looked around the table again. "And just thank you, everyone. It's been a long week, and this means a lot." The moment held for a second, just long enough to feel complete. Then it moved on, like there had never been anything missing. Except there was. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because by then, I understood something I hadn't fully put into words before. It wasn't that they had forgotten. It was that there had never been anything to remember. I continued eating. The food tasted the same as it always did, but something about it felt distant. Not wrong. Not bad. Just removed, as if I were sitting slightly outside of the moment, watching it happen instead of being part of it. Dinner carried on. Plates were passed. Glasses were refilled. Conversations shifted from one topic to another without hesitation. At one point, Emily laughed again, light and easy, completely at ease in a moment that required nothing from her. I noticed the way she leaned back in her chair, relaxed, unaware, and I realized that had always been the difference. I stood up before anyone asked. I always did. Plates moved toward me without words. Glasses were set aside within reach. No one needed to explain what happened next. It was understood. In the kitchen, the familiar rhythm returned. Water running, dishes stacking, the quiet repetition of movements that had long since become automatic. Behind me, I could still hear them talking, laughing, comfortable. At one point, Emily said something I couldn't quite make out. Then my son responded. Then laughter again. I paused, just for a second, and for the first time, it felt like I didn't belong to that sound. I finished washing the last plate and dried my hands slowly, letting the moment stretch just a little longer than usual. Not because I had more to do, but because I didn't. While I walked back into the dining room, the table had already been left behind. Chairs slightly out of place. A glass still near the edge. Small signs that the moment had ended without needing to be closed. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, looking at the space where I had been sitting just minutes before. The seat was still there, unchanged, but it felt different now. Not because anything had moved, but because I had. That night, after everything had been cleaned and put away, the house settled into a kind of quiet that didn't feel familiar. Not empty, not uncomfortable, just still. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing waiting for me. No next task, no small thing left undone. I stood in the kitchen, my hands resting lightly against the counter, almost expecting something to appear the way it always did. But nothing came, and slowly, something began to take shape. That night, after everything had been cleaned and put away, the house settled into a kind of quiet I hadn't noticed before. Not empty, not uncomfortable, just still. I stood in the kitchen longer than I needed to, my hands resting lightly against the counter, waiting without realizing I was waiting. For years, there had always been something next, something small, something easy, something that kept the rhythm moving forward without interruption. Now, there was nothing, and slowly, something began to take shape. It hadn't happened all at once. There wasn't a single moment I could point to and say, that's when it changed. It had shifted gradually, quietly, in ways that didn't call attention to themselves. A habit repeated, a detail overlooked, a pattern that became familiar enough to disappear. Until it didn't. I walked back into the dining room and sat down again, not because there was anything left to do, but because I wanted to see the space differently, from a distance, from the outside, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. The table was still set the way I had arranged it. The chairs were exactly where they had been. Nothing had fallen out of place. Nothing had been disturbed. Everything held itself. And that was when the thought settled in more clearly than before. If everything could remain like this, what had I been holding together all this time? I leaned back slightly in the chair, my hands resting in my lap. Not moving, not adjusting anything, just letting the moment stay the way it was. For years, I had believed I was part of something essential. That what I did mattered, and it did, but not in the way I had understood it. Because something could be necessary and still go unseen. I didn't feel angry. That would have been easier. Anger gives you something to push against. It gives you direction. What I felt was quieter than that. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't demand action right away, but doesn't leave once it arrives. I went to bed later than usual, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to rush past the thought that had finally formed. They hadn't meant anything by it. I knew that. They hadn't decided consciously that I didn't matter. They hadn't chosen to leave me out. They had simply stopped noticing, and I had allowed it. Not once, not suddenly, but over time, in small, quiet ways that felt harmless in the moment, until they weren't. Morning came slowly. No voices, no footsteps, no one calling out from another room. I sat up and let my feet rest on the floor, taking a moment before standing, not because I needed to, but because I wasn't being pulled forward by anything. There was no urgency, no expectation waiting for me, and that alone felt unfamiliar enough to make me pause. I walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Clean, ordered, finished. Nothing needed to be done. Nothing needed to be fixed. I stood there for a moment, looking at the space that had once required constant attention, and realized something simple. It didn't require me. It never had. I had just made sure it never showed that. I made myself a cup of tea, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. I didn't rush through it. I didn't move on to something else while the water heated. I simply stood there, watching, letting the moment stay quiet without trying to fill it. When it was ready, I poured it slowly and carried the cup to the table. I sat down. For once, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I wasn't listening for something. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was just there, and that was when the thought returned. Clearer this time. More complete. If I stopped, what would happen? At first, I didn't think I could. It had been part of my routine for so long that stopping didn't feel like a decision. It felt like breaking something, and for a moment, I wondered if I was overthinking it. If maybe it didn't mean what. It felt like it meant. If maybe it really was nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed. Quiet. Persistent. So I didn't try to answer the question. I tested it. I stood up, carried the empty cup to the sink, and rinsed it. Then I paused. My hand rested lightly against the edge of the counter, the familiar instinct still there, the need to continue, to wipe, to adjust, to check. I noticed it. And for the first time, I didn't follow it. I dried the cup, set it down, and walked away. The house remained the same. Nothing changed. Nothing broke. Nothing fell apart. And that, more than anything, answered the question. The first day passed without anything noticeable. Nothing felt different. Nothing seemed out of place. If anything, everything looked exactly the way it always had. And that was what made it so easy to ignore. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't stop everything at once. I just did less. Small things. The kind that no one notices when they're done, but always feel missing when they're not. A plate stayed on the table a little longer. A glass wasn't moved right away. A counter remained slightly cluttered. Nothing that couldn't be fixed. Nothing that demanded attention. Just enough to exist. Emily noticed it first. Not because she was looking for it, but because she had never needed to before. She stood in the kitchen, her hand resting lightly against the counter, her eyes moving slowly across the space as if something didn't quite match what she expected to see. "Do we leave this out?" she asked. My son glanced up briefly. "Probably." She nodded, then picked it up, put away, and moved on. It was simple, easy, not worth thinking about. But it didn't stop. The next morning, it happened again. Not in the same way, not in the same place, but enough to be noticed. Breakfast didn't come together as smoothly. Things had to be looked for, decided, prepared. Emily opened a cabinet, paused, closed it, opened another. "Do we buy eggs?" she asked. "I thought we had some," my son replied. She checked again, slower this time. "No," she said, "we don't." A small silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just unexpected. "Okay," she added quickly. "I'll make something else." And she did, but it wasn't effortless. And that was new. By the second day, the small things had started to connect. Not as a problem, not yet, but as a pattern. The dishes didn't disappear on their own. The counters didn't stay clear without attention. Meals didn't come together without someone thinking ahead. Nothing was difficult, but nothing was automatic. And that difference began to matter. "I feel like I've been doing things all day," Emily said, leaning slightly against the counter. Then she paused. "I mean, we always do things," she added quickly, as if correcting herself. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the same. My son looked at her. For a moment, he didn't respond, because he could see it too. He just hadn't said it yet. "We've only been here 2 days," he said finally. "I know," she replied. Another pause. "That's what I mean." Her voice wasn't frustrated. Not exactly. It was quieter than that, more aware. Later that afternoon, the house felt different in a way that was difficult to explain. Nothing had changed, but the ease was gone. The invisible structure that had held everything together was no longer invisible. It had simply stopped. That evening, as they sat down again, the conversation didn't flow the same way. Not because something was wrong, but because something was missing. There were pauses now, small ones, moments where someone had to notice something, had to act, had to decide what came next. Emily looked around the table, not at the food, not at the setting, but at the effort behind it. And slowly, something settled. "She did all of this," she said. It wasn't a question. My son nodded. "Yeah." Another pause, and we didn't even think about it. This time, he didn't answer, because there wasn't anything to correct, only something to accept. The realization didn't come all at once. It unfolded, in small pieces, in moments that didn't stand out on their own, but together formed something that couldn't be ignored. And once it was there, it didn't leave. That night, the house didn't feel the same. Not because anything had changed, but because something had finally been seen. Emily sat alone at the table for a while after everything had settled. The dishes had been cleared. The lights were softer. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. This one didn't feel complete. It felt unfinished. She rested her hands lightly on the table, her fingers tracing the edge without thinking, her mind moving through the past few days in a way that felt different from before. Not defensive, not dismissive, just honest. She thought about the dinner, the thank you, the moment that had felt complete but hadn't been. And for the first time, she didn't move past it. She stayed with it. She let it sit long enough to understand it. Then she reached for her phone, paused, and called. I answered on the second ring. "Hello." "Hi, it's me." "I know." A small silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just present. "I've been thinking," she said. I didn't respond, because this wasn't something I could explain for her. I didn't realize, she continued. Her voice was quiet, not apologizing, not defending, just certain. "I thought everything just worked." "I know," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I should have noticed," she added. I didn't correct her. I didn't soften it. Because this wasn't about blame. It was about understanding. "You didn't," I said. She let that sit. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. Just accepted it. Then, more quietly, "Are you coming back?" I looked out the window. The light outside steady. Unchanged. For a moment, I almost answered the way I always had. The way that made things easier. The way that kept everything the same. But this time I didn't. I don't know. The words didn't feel uncertain. They felt true. The drive home was quiet. Not tense. Not uncomfortable. Just quiet in a way that didn't need to be filled. When they stepped into the house, everything was exactly the way it had always been. Clean. Ordered. Complete. Nothing out of place. Nothing missing. And for the first time, they saw it. Not as something that simply existed, but as something that had been done. Every day, without being noticed. Emily walked into the kitchen and stopped. Her eyes moved slowly across the space. The counters, the table, the small details that had once felt effortless. Now they didn't. And on the table, there was a piece of paper. Folded. Placed carefully. She picked it up. Opened it. Read it. I didn't say anything because I didn't think I needed to. Now I know I did. She read it again. Slower this time. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she finally did. Behind her, my son stepped into the room. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to, because he understood. That evening, the house felt different. Not empty, just visible. Emily stood at the counter, her hands resting lightly against it, the same way mine had countless times before. But this time, she noticed. The effort, the space, the quiet work that made everything else possible. She reached for a cloth and wiped the surface slowly. Not rushing, not avoiding it, just doing it. Behind her, my son picked up plate, placed it in the sink. No one said anything, because this time, I didn't need to. Across the city, I sat by the window, a cup of tea in my hands. The light outside soft and steady. There was nothing waiting for me. No expectation, no unfinished task, just space. And this time, it belonged to me. Not an argument, not a goodbye, just a realization that had been there all along. The only difference was, this time, no one could ignore it.